What's going on, everybody? It's Clint from the Die Hard MMA podcast, and this is the total takedown for UFC Columbus. Once again, this is for the overs and the unders. If you want to see my full breakdown with my special guest talking about who we think are going to win the fights, that was on Monday. Go check it out, pubsportsradio.com. Let's break into these totals. First fight of the night, Luis Saldana taking on Bruno Souza. The total sitting at 2.5. And did I forget to mention that these lines are brought to you by the Superbook? We're going based off Superbook Sports and all of their lines for these totals and numbers. So the market variance may differ just a little bit. That's why we're using these ones. Bruno Silva, Luis Saldana, 2.5. Over 2.5 is minus 215. The under 2.5 is plus 190. Over makes a ton of sense to me here in this spot. This is going to be a striker versus striker karate style matchup. Every once in a while, Bruno Souza level changes and takes it to the mat. We've seen Luis Saldana, slow down in his fights, but he's never been taken out of there. He's hard to finish. I don't want to say never, but he's tough to finish. He's tough to get out of there. So even if he does get tired, if he does slow down, I don't necessarily believe that Souza's going to be capable of finishing him. It's possible, but I kind of feel like both these guys are going to have a bit of a staring contest, a bit of a feeling out process, lots of wheel kicks from distance that are just missing, and I think we end up inching this one over that 2.5. Minus 215 is a little pricey for me, but I do think it goes to decision. David Dvorak taking on Matthias Nicolou. Total set at 2.5 once again. The over is minus 225. The under is plus 195. I've got a sneaky sensation of violence for this fight. This is a big step up in competition for David Dvorak. I keep saying Christian Dvorak. He's a hockey player. David Dvorak, he's an absolute monster. I love this kid. I love everything to do with Dvorak. I think he's got a bright future in the sport. He had about a year off. He had a surgery, repaired a nagging injury, healed up his body. We're going to see an improved version of him come Saturday. His opponent, Matthias Nicolou, he's well-rounded, tons of experience, good BJJ, decent boxing. He's a bit low volume, though. He has a bit of a chin issue. 2 of his losses come by knockout. He's been wobbled in a lot of his recent fights. Even Elliott made him wobble around the last time he fought. So this is a spot where, honestly, I'm thinking David Dvorak is live for a knockout. If he gets a little overexcited, we could end up in a ground scramble, and both these guys are definitely going to be live for a submission once it hits the mat. So I think there is some sneaky under-violence possibility in this fight. The under 2.5 is plus 195. I don't mind that. Now, bear in mind, this is one of those fights where both guys kind of are a little bit similar in their stylistic approach. We could end up with a range game, both guys waiting to counter type of over situation here. But I tend to think that one of them's going to land, and once one of them does, it's going to be off to the races. Both guys like to use the leg kicks. I really like Dvorak's leg kicks. I think he's going to force Nicolou to take some kind of action, whether that's coming in and opening up a strike or whether that's shooting for a takedown because his legs are getting chopped up. I do think he's going to force the fight that way, so the violence should end up hitting, second, third type of round. Jennifer Maia taking on Manon Fiorot. We got a total set at 2.5 for the ladies here, minus 240 to the over, plus 210 to the under. And I'm dead over here on this one. I mean, Manon hits hard. She goes out there and takes the fight to her opponents. But Jennifer Maia has been incredibly durable from what we've seen. I don't think she's going to get cracked in this spot. If Jennifer Maia decides to take this thing to the mat, maybe there is some submission upside from her there. We're not entirely sure what Manon does on the floor at this point. That's the big question mark about her game. But we also have seen Jennifer Maia just kind of blanket control people from the top. So even if it does go down, I'm not convinced that it's finishing. I do think we're going to the judges' scorecards. We've got Khizriev making his UFC debut next up, taking on Denis Tulilian. And battle of last names here. Total set at 1.5. Over is plus 160 for 1.5 rounds. The under 1.5 is minus 180. And I kind of like that under 1.5, except that price is terrible. I mean, what we've got is a guy in Denis who doesn't belong in the UFC. He's 10-5. He hasn't proven himself. He's coming in short notice to save this fight, taking on a very tough opponent. But he's definitely a killer be killed type of fighter. If he's going to win this thing, it's going to be taking some heat early and then coming back with damage of his own. Khizriev is the type of guy, undefeated, 13-0, can win this fight, grappling, decision, submission, ground and pound. Like, he's got it all. He can win this fight however he wants to. So if he takes it to the floor, the submission, I think, is going to be live from the opening bell. If he wants to strike, the knockout would be something that I think comes a little bit later. I don't want to sell Tulilian short. He definitely is a guy that takes a little bit of punishment before he goes down. So this would be a sweaty one. I don't want to lay minus 180 on an under 1.5 when we could get out of round one, and then it's off to the races from there. Who knows how long it'll take. I don't want to touch this one from a total perspective. Next up, Danaa Batgarel taking on Chris Gutierrez. Total set at 2.5. Very binary fight here, in my opinion, because if you're picking Danaa here, you more than likely think he finishes. That's what he's been doing. He's got the big power. He comes in hot, takes people's heads off. So if you're thinking Danaa wins this fight, you probably think under 2.5 at plus 110. If you think Chris Gutierrez, you're probably thinking the over 2.5 at minus 130. Personally, I'm in the Gutierrez camp. I do think he uses those leg kicks, uses his head movement, works around that big cage, makes Danaa chase him a little bit, and then he manages to win a decision. Now, this is one of those sketchy ones, though, where we've seen Danaa go 15 minutes, so we could see a decision for him, and we also have seen Chris Gutierrez kick the legs off of people and win by KO himself. So it's not safe, even though it's like binary. It's not totally binary, if you know what I mean. I'm going to bank on Chris Gutierrez's durability. Like, I think that if this guy does get clipped, he's got the movement, he's got the speed, he's got the wrestling to stay alive, stay in the fight. So the over 2.5, where I think Gutierrez wins a decision, or he at least survives for Danaa to win a decision. That's kind of the way I'd be looking at this fight personally. Next up, we got Sara McMann taking on Karol Rosa. Total set at 2.5. The over is minus 185, and the under is plus 165. And the under, I think, makes sense here. Plus 165 is not a good enough number for women's MMA, in my opinion. You know, I want this line to be a little wider, a little bit more open. But we've seen Sara McMann. We know she's got that Olympic wrestling. We know she's got that tight squeeze on her. She's got a monster of a body. She's in great shape. Karol Rosa is someone who is hard to take down, so if she makes McMann stand with her on the feet, then I do think that McMann gets TKO'd, and we've seen Sara McMann gas out, get exhausted, and give up a third round finish multiple times. So at that 2.5 round mark, you know, the first 2 minutes and 30 seconds of round 3, that's on the table for Sara McMann to have her classic gas out finish. And then both women can definitely finish earlier on. I mean, Karol Rosa can just put a pace on her and probably crack her in round 2 if she really wants to. McMann is going to be live for a takedown and a submission in that first round. So I think there's some violence here, definitely plus 165. I wish that line was a little bit better, but the bookies are onto us here. They know what's going on for this fight. So yeah, I do think there's a good chance for this one to finish. Neil Magny taking on Max Griffin. Total set at 2.5. The over is minus 220. The under is plus 195. Max Griffin's a guy that, you know, he blew the ear off for me. He's Brahimaj. He's got decent striking. He's hard to take down, hard to control. Neil Magny's a guy that's only really been finished by a handful of guys, and, you know, the Ponzinibbio fourth round leg kick situation really comes to mind. He's not a guy that you finish. He's a decision machine. Now, he came out on an interview and talked about him getting the finish this week. Fighters always say that. Like, I would love for him to come out and get a finish. I've got a parlay with him. It'll cash that much easier if he gets it done early, but I expect this thing go to 15 minutes. I'd be looking at that over 2.5 at minus 220. This one should be competitive, but if it does hit the ground, I mean, like I said, Max Griffin's got good takedown defense, but if Magny gets on top of him on the floor, there is a chance maybe he finishes TKO submission, something like that, but I don't really see Max Griffin having what it takes to, like, stand and KO Neil Magny, and Magny's a volume guy on the feet. He's not going to stand and KO someone like Max Griffin either, so definitely going over here. Marc Diakiese taking on Slava Claus Borschev. What we've got is a total set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is surprisingly kind of plus 130. The under minus 150. So the bookies are expecting a finish in this one. And I can understand based on what Slava Claus has done so far in his UFC run. Marc Diakiese giving up that first round submission last time out. That one hurt. I was on Diakiese for that one. I think this is a spot where we actually get a bit more of a well-rounded MMA fight, a technical striking match on the feet. Diakiese kind of lures his opponents into these low-volume striking matches, and then he also has decent wrestling in his back pocket. We've seen Borschev get taken down. He gets back up, but we've absolutely seen him pretty easy to get on the mat. If Diakiese wants to come in here and mix in those takedowns, we could see some time chipped off the clock. We absolutely could see this thing grind its way out. So even though we've got a striking match here, Diakiese's a hard guy to finish on the feet. I mean, Rafael Fiziev wasn't able to knock him out on the feet, so I'm not sure I'm expecting Diakiese to knock out Borschev. I mean, I don't want to doubt Borschev. He could knock out Diakiese, but I think Diakiese's pretty durable, actually, and it's been the submissions that have really kind of gotten him. So I would take that plus money on the over 2.5. I do kind of think we're going to see a 15-minute striking affair here. Alexey Oleynik taking on Ilir Latifi. Total set at 1.5. The over is minus 160. The under plus 140. And these are the types of boys where I really don't want any part of this total because it could go over easily. If Latifi is getting those takedowns and he's kind of grinding on Alexey, this one goes over by a mile. However, the way Oleynik fights, generally speaking, is he clubs and subs people. He tries to crash the pocket recklessly, hit you right behind the ear. Once you hit the mat, you're in a chokehold. The boa squeezes tighter than anybody. And then he also is super old. He's like 48, 49 years. No, I'm kidding. But Latifi's the kind of guy that's got that compact power. We have seen Oleynik knocked out before cleanly by these power punchers. Latifi's not on the level of someone like a Derek Lewis, obviously, but if he connects right against a man this age, it could be over in a hurry. So the under makes total sense, but at the same time, I kind of think Alexey Oleynik's going to take a little bit more of a paced approach here, understanding that he's got some significant upside in this fight. He's got some areas where he is better than Ilir Latifi, and then I think Latifi's going to do what he does, which is ground his opponent and try and chip away the clock from top position and not really do much with it, because that's how he fights. So I do think that over 1.5 is hitting, but if there was ever a fight that was going to be dangerous for you to hit an over 1.5, it's one like this. Askar Askarov taking on Kara France. Total set at 2.5. The over is minus 210. The under is plus 185. And I kind of like violence here, if I'm being honest. Kara France is a guy that's got that absolute nuke in his hand. We saw what he did to Cody Garbrandt. Granted, Cody is chinny, but Kara France is super fast. When he strikes on the feet, the dude is lightning quick. Askar Askarov, 14-0-1, undefeated, 1 draw on his record. This guy was finishing everybody outside the UFC, and I've talked about this before. Once you get to the UFC level, it takes you a little while to acclimate. Once you acclimate, you start finishing people again. He is a finisher by nature, and even though he's got that super high-level wrestling, and maybe Kara France is tough enough to deal with that, I think the ground and pound, the submissions, those are going to be available if he's controlling this fight. So it's Kara on the feet. He could clip anybody. He could absolutely clip and KO Askar. I don't think it happens, but it could happen. Askar on the mat, though, he's wide open. Kara France could get subbed, could get KO'd. I think violence is actually kind of fun here. Plus 185 on the under 2.5. Very tempting. Matt Brown taking on Matt the Immortal Brown. Bryan Barberena taking on Matt the Immortal Brown. Total set at 2.5. Over is plus 135. Under is minus 155. And this one feels too easy. It feels like an under spot, and it feels like one where the bookies are, hanging a half-decent number, and then it just flies over for no freaking reason. Matt Brown, we know he's older. We know he's got durability issues, but God, he still has that power. He still absolutely has that chin-shattering power. Bryan Barberena on the flip side of this thing, he seems like a little bit of a shell of himself. He got wobbled by Jason Witt in his last fight. He still hits pretty hard from what we've seen. He's got a half-decent ground game on him. This is a tough fight. It's an old man bum fight, and I feel like one of these guys is going to clip the other. I just can't help get away from that feeling. I mean, I think Matt Brown wins it, but at the same time, Bryan Barberena, even though he's taken a bunch of damage, is younger, and even though he wasn't able to KO Jason Witt, big question mark there as to why he wasn't able to pull that off. Matt Brown has miles on his body and could maybe potentially not take the same kind of shots that Jason Witt could, especially to the body. So I do think there's finishing upside here from both guys, and we know both guys can get finished. So under 2.5, minus 155. It's there. I haven't bet it, but again, it's just kind of staring at me. It looks like co-main event here, Jojo Wood taking on Alessa Grasso. I feel like this bout order is not accurate, but maybe it is. I don't know. I got to double check. Total set at 2.5. Over is minus 310. Under is plus 260. And yeah, again, this is when I expect to sail over. Jojo Calderwood is someone who's been incredibly durable. Again, the ground game, the grappling is what's really given her problems. I don't see her shooting for takedowns on Alessa Grasso. Grasso's a Mexican boxer. She's a striker by nature. She's not going to be looking for takedowns and grappling herself. At least we wouldn't expect so. So unless somebody pulls a rabbit out of the hat and does something completely different from what we're expecting, this thing should go over. We're going to have a women's MMA striking match. Grasso hits hard. She's got pinpoint accuracy when she's boxing, but Jojo Wood, if she was ever going to take something, it was going to be a punch, not a sub. So I do think we're going to get a 15-minute striking affair, and I really don't see Wood finishing anybody. If the finish is going to come, it's going to come from Grasso, and the rule is both fighters have to contribute in some way to an under before we can take it. So yeah, definitely looking over. Main event time. Curtis Blaydes taking on Chris Daukaus. Total set here at 1.5 per Superbook. Over is -185. The under is +165. And heavyweight's gonna heavyweight, man. This is one of those spots where, again, this thing could be over in 60 seconds. But if it's not, I do kind of think Curtis Blaydes drags Chris Daukaus' big ass to the mat and mauls him for 15 minutes. Like, I don't think this fight's going the distance, but at the same time, it absolutely could get over that 1.5. Daukaus has such fast hands, though. We have seen Curtis Blaydes chipped away before. We have seen him clipped and hurt and knocked out. I mean, he took 2 big shots from Francis Ngannou. It didn't seem like he was really all the way out on those. He always protested those stoppages, but, like, it's Francis. And then he got deaded by Derek Lewis. I mean, just folded over by the Black Beast. You got to wonder what his chin looks like here in this spot. If he doesn't shoot takedowns and in a hurry, Chris Daukaus is going to do some damage on the feet. We know how fast this guy is. We know how hard he hits. It's the get-up game. It's the ground game. It's the anti-wrestling. It's the submission ability. We know Daukaus is a black belt, but we haven't really seen him have to get up from under a heavyweight grappler in the UFC before, so I don't know if he can do it against Curtis Blaydes. Once it hits the mat, we know Blaydes has got that nasty ground and pound killer KO, and Daukaus, I know it was Derek Lewis last time out, but we've seen him get clipped before too. He got hurt and knocked out on the regional scene before he made it to the UFC. So, like, I'm worried about the chins of both of these guys. This thing could absolutely go under that 1.5, but I kind of think there's going to be a respect thing with both guys coming off bad knockout losses. Blaydes kind of got a bounce back spot between them, but you know what I'm saying. Blaydes is going to wrestle. He's going to look for the ground game. And Chris Daukaus, it's going to be up to him to clip him before he gets him to the mat, or find his way back up to the feet, find a sub, throw up an armbar, stuff that we just haven't ever seen before. It's there. It could happen, but I think it probably happens maybe after a round and a half. So I'm going to say over. Don't really like it, though. Sketchy as hell. Not betting that one. That's the total takedown, folks. Make sure you smash the like button here for me at Pub Sports Radio. We'll see you tomorrow for the undefeated post-weigh-in show. Let's roll.